Before the talk, since so many people have asked me about Tom, the surgery was considered successful. There was no damage done to his nerves, facial nerves. Doctors were pleased. He is now in his room, back in his room, out of intensive care. There is no word yet whether the tumor was malignant or not. Did I say he's in pain and discomfort over his head having been in one direction for 10 hours? And at the end of yesterday's email, Mary thanks for all the support and asks that this positive energy and prayers for Tom's convalescence keep coming. Day 5 of the June 98 7-day retreat in Springwater. We come to a retreat often out of a very stressful and hurried life, very speedy. Not for everybody, but for most of us, lots of things to do, never enough time to do it, a lot of conflict with ourselves, with others, at home, at the workplace, etc. And it's in the air, particularly if one lives in a city. I could tell, being in Europe again, there's very little private living. Most of it is in apartments, in apartment houses, where you share common pipes and ceilings and walls and staircases. So one comes to retreat yearning for that peace and quiet, which is amply present here as far as the sparsity of population is concerned. The vast meadows and hills, hills upon hills and valleys, so much sky. I remember the first time seeing this land ending up at the upper meadow before you enter the woods. And looking all around, there was no place where there wasn't sky and horizon. So here one arrives, and often the very first evening has that intensity and quietness on a Saturday evening. Very little traffic. There was no storm, no rain, no wind, no thunder or lightning. Birds were beginning to quiet down. But it doesn't remain like that for most of us, most of the time. Sitting quietly and becoming more aware of resistances and maybe a diminishing or even dissolving of some of our habitual resistances has another side to it. all kinds of stuff bubbles up, which has formerly been resisted, unconsciously, numbed. The first thing that happens when numbness gives way to feeling is pain. Sometimes people say, I love to feel pain where I felt nothing before. So all kinds of stuff bubbles up. Nightmares and daymares happen to people, all of us, at one time or another, in this kind of work of quieting down and awareing resistances, and in the awareing, less resistance, more openness, more porousness for stuff to manifest, to present itself. Sometimes a sudden memory of a traumatic experience. It doesn't have to be this way. I know the mind already says, I've never had that. Is something wrong with me? It happens. I can't always remember to say it, but nothing that is said here is said for everybody at all times right now. But it's very generally true for all of us. And we are all of us. Something is happening to you, is happening to me too, in that wholeness of being. So trauma has happened to every one of us, to one extent or another. None of us grew up without it. Some stronger, more violent, for others less. Maybe not violence to oneself, but observing it being done to others. And there is, or are, mechanisms in this body-mind that when, particularly for a young, vulnerable organism, it becomes too much fear, too much pain, there's a closing off, shutting down process. It's not intentional. All of these mechanisms are built in throughout our long, long history. Shutting down, encapsulating, numbing. And coming to something like a quiet retreat, sharing it with many people whom one does not know, which means inviting projections onto others. Because whoever we don't immediately and directly meet completely, we project onto. The brain wants to know what it is dealing, who it is dealing with. So it has a response. That's why it's so important to meet each other directly, not through pictures, not through what happened in the past, but immediately without mediation, so that the projections can become visible and maybe collapse, dissolve, dissipate. So, talking too fast. A lot of stuff to be looked at. We're sitting here together, quietly, with many people whom we don't know. And all kinds of projections may be happening, which trigger memories, which surface, are frightening. Maybe of violence, fear, trauma, whatever. So, what is the true art of being, of living and being, which is one, living being, with all the stuff that has accumulated for humankind through a very traumatic, very difficult, very violent past of power and victimization, conscious as well as unconscious. What is the art of living with all of that residue? Which is our so-called unconscious mind. Unconscious consciousness. I'm saying unconscious consciousness because the moment it comes into awareness, it's no longer the unconscious, the dreaded or ominous unconscious. It's only something that is not aware for the time being. And it's also interesting, some children have a more quote-unquote natural presence about traumatic events happening. They may not even be traumatic for them. They are there, aware, and don't have no need for this repressive or numbing process to set in. Others don't. They're overwhelmed. Why this is so, I don't know, but it is so. Some of us can remember things that happened in our past much more clearly and remembering being present while it was happening than others who have even turned things around and think they had a happy childhood or something like that, or can't remember anything. So there are differences. Why? I don't know. But the question was, how do we live with this accumulated and more freely manifesting residue of our collective painful past? Somebody asked, this is a marvelous place. I would like to know, how do people on staff deal with emotions? How do we deal with emotions? I'm not going to go into this right now, but it is a huge, monumental question. Living so close together as we do here, or as people do in families. One house, sometimes one apartment, lots of people in it, rubbing up against each other. How do we live with it? With what's there for all of us? I have to see. There's no prescription for this. It is a matter of finding out, how do I live with it? What happens? What are the mechanisms, defenses, projections, accusation, protection, distortion, a lot of distortion in our viewing each other, categorizing each other, and so forth. Again, there's not the immediacy of fresh contact. And can we be fresh? Or do we still have to once more make yesterday's point? I didn't get it across yesterday, so today maybe I will get it across to you. The big cross. One person mentioned in a meeting, when I hear people mention what is called peak experiences, vastness, boundless energy, whatever all the words are we're using to describe something that one has come upon or that has come upon one. No one there. When I hear about that, I'm wondering, Am I missing something? Or is it just the way I live, a little bit more porous all the time to all that's going on? Really being with the moment, not in an idealized spiritual way, but being with the moment of upset, of disappointment, of hurt, of joy, of painful remembrances, whatever. This art of being with it all, porously, letting it pass through and pass by, which it does. The only thing that fixates things is thought and memory, fixing things in what we believe is time, but it's just memory and anticipation of a so-called future which is imagined now, always now. So what does it mean? We use the word so much it has become flat. To be in the moment, to completely be with what's happening right now, whether painful, frightening, angering, hurting, or joying, pleasing. To completely be with it, so completely going with it and going through it, if you will. The words are not perfect. That there's no residue left of it. Have you noticed that when you completely with something, experiencing it from beginning to end, present, nothing spectacular, be a little ordinary thing. One remembers very little of it later. And this is what it comes to with living this work, is there may be old residue which may bubble up as a nightmare or a daymare, but there's not so much new accumulation of residues. Because I didn't quite pay attention, I wasn't quite there, and immediately thought takes it over, adding it to the story of my life, which we live in much more than this moment-to-moment happening. Dwelling in our story, adding to it, reminiscing about it, and projecting it into the future. What will my future be? It's food for fantasy and adding residues. And there are a lot of things to be observed when one goes through a very painful or frightening experience. Lots of things to be watched. Why is it painful? Because I see myself in a new light, a violent dream. I thought there was no violence in my life. I was beyond that. To learn about the power of images we have about ourselves and the clinging power. This is what I am. I don't want to be what is revealing itself here. But what is revealing itself here isn't me either. It's just old residue bubbling up in a mind that is less resistant, more porous. To say this is me and mine is extra, but very powerful extra. Because this is what we cling to, because we think this is what we are. My memories, my story, my idea and knowledge about myself and others. from whom I'm different, separate, distinguishable. So that's one thing to observe when we're very upset about something. Is there imagery in a way which says, no, this isn't how it should be. What it should be is like this, and the clinging to that, which does not allow this complete going through, into, and through it, completely, without images, without identification. Something else very common, typical is painful thing happens, or a discouraging mood, despair, and the assumption, the unconscious, instant assumption, this is going to last forever. Amazing, it's amazing. How it functions so quickly, so universally. And by assuming it and brooding in that way, thought continuing by thinking, this is how I am, this is how I'm going to be forever, this is how my situation is going to be on end for all eternity, that fixates and solidifies states which would normally come and go like the weather. So can we be more watchful of this is going to be like this forever, and question it. Whatever really comes into awareness can be questioned. Is this really true? How do I know? Do I have to assume this? Is this really so? And this is already being outside of the loop. But first has to be awareing it. Without that, this automatism of a body-mind continues. It's not always automatic, because when there's insight and listening, this body changes. And thoughts change from a confused bundle to a more orderly thinking process that comes with more insight, more clarity. So this body is not doomed forever to be automatic, unautomatic. And those automatisms or repetitiveness that is necessary in our life, the routines, can come into awareness as necessary routines as they happen. Like either in brushing one's teeth very thoroughly. It's either an automatic technique, which means thought is entirely someplace else while this goes on. Then it's truly automatic. Or it's just there with the brush, the foam, the saliva, the feeling before and after. The whole thing. So it's routine, it's automatic, because the hand knows how to turn, and the arm and the mouth. But it's lit up. It's an awareness. So, a marvelous opportunity in a retreat from which one expected so much peace and quiet and harmony, to be with the stuff. Become porous to the stuff and maybe begin to see through it from a different place, which is no locality. Sometimes people say, when I hear you talk of the spaciousness, I want it. I want to get there. It sounds so good and so necessary. You see, we're already there. It's already there. It's not a place to get to through arduous, laborious practices. If we're aware of the arduous, laborious practice as of brushing teeth, then we're there. And we don't have to go any place with it. It doesn't matter what we're doing. If it begins to be permeated with attention, awareness, presence, then it's suddenly clear that there is no place to go. No promised land. That's for food for the fantasy, which finds it's much more interesting to live there than in the nitty-gritty, moment-to-moment, unspectacular happenings, which are only unspectacular or nitty-gritty because they're not freshly lived. Fresh living needs less and less fantasy nourishment. By which I'm not saying that it's not a wonderful thing to see a really good movie, and the tastes are different for each one of us, to totally enter into fantasy land. Or story, novel, poetry. And yet, when one has the feeling this author really had their feet down on the ground, I find it reads easier. But I'll leave that alone right now. I want to get an argument over. So this question, which came up for several people, again, are there really two realms, two modes of being? One ensconced and entangled in the conditioned world, which is greatly nourished by thought and memory, and the connection with the emotions and feelings and old residues. Is that one level of existing, and then there's this other level of space and vastness and awareness and presence and know me? Are these really two? When the one reigns, the other one is absent. When the other reigns, then there's no memory of. When conditionedness reigns and reactiveness, hurt and hurting, then where is this spaciousness and openness? Sometimes we meet together and we go round and round and round the same psychological stuff. Over and over, maybe with a little bit of new input. Somebody was asking, is there a way of cutting through that? To a different place. And in asking that, where is one? Is one at that different place? Which is open and all embracing, understanding and yet not involved, self-centeredly, self-referentially. That's the question. It's like with the brushing teeth. Is there awareness of what's going on, or is it smogged over so that all that reigns is the smog with all of its reactions and remembrances and storing it up for the future? What I learned, what I found out, what I experienced. That's all smog. And where is the emptiness and openness at such a moment? See, let us never get into settling this matter theoretically, philosophically. We can, but it's meaningless. Find out as you live, and then ask the question in the midst of entanglement, my gosh, what's going on? Stopping for a moment and listening inwardly, outwardly, there's no difference between the two. And is this presence immediately there? Or does one find one has to go with the argument, with the fight, with the winning, with the losing, with the asserting oneself, with this often so unconscious self-centeredness? That's the question. How are we going to tackle it? Theoretically, speculatively, or wondering in my moment-to-moment living? Where am I? What am I? What's going on? Which is sort of a way of cutting through the entanglement. Is it possible? Find out. Find out. The question is alive for a lot of people in every retreat, whether here or over there. How to take some of this home into our narrow, compressed lives of so much suffering. And not necessarily to already make stratagems, which is what the mind does. This is what the mind is for. It has developed to make strategy for future contingencies. But this is not how this works. It's just a plain and simple openness, this moment of feeling so closed. Open to the closedness. This is how we start. And not defending it and rationalizing it and protecting it from others who seem to be attacking it. But what is it? What is going on? To sort of stop for a moment. Which should be easier in a place like this, but not necessarily so. Our habits and needs are so powerful, so fed by past residue. Do we want to penetrate it, look into it, find out about it? I don't mean finding out about all of our trauma. That is a psychological inquiry. They come up as people experience. They bubble up for some people on their own. But stopping and touching what's there, the numbness, the hurt, the enclosure, the whatever, or the lust for fighting. None of it is right or wrong. It's what's happening right now. Is it just happening blindly, holding on to it, defending it, or wondering about it? Some shift taking place in the midst of so much habitual power, habit force. And maybe when this question is really strong and powerful, cannot be squelched. What is going on in my life, really, truly, not what I want to be going on, how I want things to be, but what is going on and how are things? When that question is unsquelchable, then there'll be the energy to look and wake up from the nightmare and wonder about it. Wonder about all these emotions it has triggered. Not where did they come from necessarily, although if that is the question, then there'll be answers to that. Maybe not. But be with it all in a new way, not to be explained. We find it out as we go. No one can ultimately teach it to us. But it can be found out, come upon. Because presence is always here. Whenever it's here, isn't it? We end here for today.